Good afternoon and welcome to the USDA listening session for the Farm Labor Stabilization and Protection Pilot Grant Program. We are sure glad that you are joining us today. First, I want to inform you of some special accommodations available, including ASL interpretation and Spanish translation. For those requiring ASL interpretation, we have enabled closed captioning and have also spotlighted ASL interpretation for you. Thank you to Ashley Mangy and Kathy Williams for providing these interpretation services for us. Spanish translation is available on the Zoom platform by pressing the interpretation button on the toolbar and selecting Spanish. Today's webinar session is being recorded. A link to the webinar recording will be made available in the days following the broadcast to all registrants and posted on our website, which you can see on the screen, www.fsa.usda.gov/farmworkers. We also encourage that all comments, including comments provided today in the listening session, be provided in writing to the notice on the Federal Register via the Federal e-rulemaking portal. Please submit those written comments to www.regulations.gov/FSA 2022-0013-001. And you can see that link on your screen, and we'll also be dropping that in the chat box. The links to the website and the Federal Register are in the chat right now. Thank you, Kaylee. My name is Dana Rogie, and I am Farm Service Agency's Acting National Program Manager for Outreach. We have a jam-packed agenda for today's event, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ann Kanapke, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy in the Office of the Secretary. Ann's going to give us some opening remarks and discuss the Farm Labor Stabilization and Protection Pilot Grant Program. Ann?
Thank you, Dana, very much. And thanks to all of you for taking time to provide input as we look to design this pilot program. When the COVID-19 pandemic first struck, we were given a wake-up call regarding farm workers. They were deemed essential employees, and the pandemic put a spotlight on the importance of this workforce and their contributions to our nation's food security. As those on this call today know full well, they work every day in fruit orchards and dairy farms in the blazing heat and the freezing cold to ensure families have food on their tables. The pandemic also highlighted challenges of labor instability, challenges of irregular migration, and the need for increased labor protections, all challenges that we need to address in order to increase the resiliency of our food system and supply chain. We know these are not new challenges, though. These challenges have persisted for far too long. Leveraging resources provided through the American Rescue Plan, USDA, in coordination with other federal agencies, is developing this pilot program to provide support for agricultural employers and implementing robust labor standards to promote a safe, healthy work environment for both U.S. workers and workers hired from Northern Central American countries under the seasonal H-2A visa program. We know that there are concerns with the H-2A program, and I want to acknowledge with this group all the reporting, recommendations, and engagement across the federal government on ways to improve the program. We know many of you have spent many hours over many years talking with agencies, publishing reports on structural changes, needed worker protections, employer compliance, stronger federal oversight. We appreciate that input and feedback. This listening session is a formal process for input on the pilot program. It is helpful for the federal government to hear suggestions in this forum in response to the questions posed. It's important that we hear from all of you to ensure that we design a program that is effective and impactful. I'm grateful for your time, participation, and perspective. I'll now turn to Ria Mehta, Chief of Staff for our Farm Service Agency. Ria.
Thank you, Ann, and thanks everyone for being here today. I'll just echo Ann's thanks for your time and for your participation and for your perspectives. I'm here with the Farm Service Agency, the agency in USDA that will be not only administering these listening sessions, but also standing up the grant program. The FSA has 2,100 state and county offices across the country, and in those offices, FSA staff directly interface with producers, ag employers, and other ag stakeholders every day. They hear directly from our producers about their labor challenges, and they also hear directly from stakeholders and farm worker advocates and farm workers themselves about the challenges that they face. So we at FSA are particularly excited to be able to facilitate these listening sessions and help stand up this important program. As you all know, we're here in a listening session today, but I just want to share that we did host 2 other sessions yesterday to ensure we're having a robust discussion and ample opportunity for all stakeholders who want to be heard and to be heard. So we've heard from agricultural employers and labor unions, and today we're really looking forward to hearing from the advocacy community and other stakeholders. Information gained at these listening sessions and via written comments to the Federal Register is intended to guide the program in development. So we really look forward to taking all of the feedback from the sessions this week and using that to develop a program that will work. There is a 30-day comment period to ensure that we receive full participation from everyone. So please do also participate in that written comment period. Comments for the pilot grant program will be accepted through October 24th of 2022. We anticipate that following the stakeholder feedback gathering process, the team at FSA and others across USDA and the federal family will be working together to develop the grant program, and we anticipate the program will launch in the spring of 2023. Just a reminder that these sessions here today are conducted by the USDA and the Farm Service Agency. And with that, Dana, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Ria and Anne, for those comments. So to kick us off, I'd like to briefly discuss how this virtual listening session will run and highlight a few housekeeping rules. First, to reduce background noise and distractions, your microphone has been muted and your camera turned off. We do ask that you ensure your name appears exactly how you've registered on the screen to allow the host and myself to find you when you're called upon to speak. If you need to change your name, find your name in the participant list and hover over it. Hit more and then rename and change your name as applicable. You have the option to activate closed captioning to appear along the bottom of your monitor by pressing the live transcription option. This is a listening session, therefore the chat box has been disabled and will not be used for the remainder of the event. The chat room today already contains links to the program website to learn more about the program, also a link to the Federal Register and the Federal e-rulemaking portal, where your written comments should be submitted. Additionally, the use of multimedia, PowerPoints, and other visual aids by registered speakers is not allowed. We want to emphasize that all comments made today should also be made in writing at the web address on your screen now. And once again, that is www.regulations.gov/FSA 2022-0013-0001. Written comments will be accepted until October 24th of 2022. Attendees selected to speak to USDA officials will have 5 minutes to present. Our host will locate your name within the attendee list, and when it's your turn, you'll see a prompt on your computer sent by the host asking you to unmute your microphone and activate your video feed. And we do ask that you do both. Your video feed will appear spotlighted on the screen. When I introduce you, please know that your time will start then. Your 5 minutes time will start. I will remind you when you have 30 seconds remaining by turning my camera on. When your allotted time to speak expires, I will turn my microphone on and remind you to conclude your remarks. Should your comments surpass 10 seconds, your microphone will be muted and your video feed turned off. When your camera and microphone are on, we do ask that you start by stating your name and affiliation and then proceed with your comment. Okay, well, as we begin the comment period, we do have some questions that we would like for you to keep in mind when making your comments. And you can see those now on your screen. First, what barriers or challenges do farm workers, specifically those in Northern Central American countries, face in participating in the H-2A visa program? What do you recommend to enhance farm worker protections, including during recruitment and employment? What methods do you recommend for enforcement and verification of those protections that will promote a safer, healthier work environment for both U.S. workers and workers hired from Northern Central American countries under the seasonal H-2A visa program? What suggestions do you have to help ensure compliance for the additional standards required by recipients of grants as part of this Farm Labor Stabilization and Protection Pilot Grant Program? And finally, what recommendations do you have to increase farm worker awareness of their resources and worker rights, both for workers within the United States and for the H-2A visa holders in their country of origin? And with that, we will now begin our comments period. I will call upon our first speaker and then let the next two speakers after that know your speaking order so you can be prepared as well. So first up, we have Renee Abo-Amps. And following her, we have Yalisa Ambrise. And up after that will be David Bacon. So Renee, you are up first. Do we have Renee on with us today?
Yes, hi, how you doing? This is Renee Abo-Amps with MCM.
Okay, you may begin.
Amy Liebman will be speaking on behalf of MCM, so I'm gonna call on Amy Liebman.
I can go when you're ready. I think there was some confusion. I signed up to speak from Migrant Clinicians Network. So you just let me know if you want me to start or wait.
Go ahead, Amy. We'll just use your spot here for Amy's or for Renee's, and we can notate that when we get lower down for your spot.
Okay.
So go ahead, Amy.
Great. Well, hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Amy Liebman, and I serve as the Chief Program Officer for Workers, Environment, and Climate at Migrant Clinicians Network. Our organization, MCN, is a national nonprofit. We create practical solutions at the intersection of vulnerability, migration, and health. And every step of our 38 years, we have worked closely with clinicians, workers, policymakers, health systems, and researchers to foster a safe and healthy workplace and to remove obstacles for healthcare access for farm workers. First, I really want to commend the USDA and the Biden-Harris administration for their efforts to improve the resiliency of our food and agricultural supply chain, and an effort that emphasizes the health and safety and farm workers. I think many of my colleagues today are going to talk about the H-2A program and many of the violations that have taken place in terms of workers' rights and the need for policymakers and regulators to address them and not allow the H-2A program to continue in its current form. And positively, we'll hear a lot about that going forward. So I'm going to focus my comments on looking at enhancing farm worker protections and increasing farm worker awareness of resources and worker rights. And I think a critical way to increase farm worker awareness about the resources and their rights is going to be through some meaningful and culturally contextual education. And I think if we look around this virtual room, as well as many of the other conversations that USDA has had, we know that there are numerous farm worker organizations, including my organization, Migrant Clinicians Network, that have a long history of successfully educating farm workers on various health and safety topics, on their worker rights, and those topics are broad and wide, from pesticide safety to heat to labor rights. Many organizations have done a really great job working directly with farm workers in the community to pass on this education. And for our H2A worker program, by whom the training is done, where and when it is done, and how it is done is going to greatly impact the end result that will ultimately determine whether or not we'll have any impact on the health and safety of farm workers. So I want to just begin by talking about by whom. And I think it's really important to recognize that the educational efforts can't happen in a vacuum. They must be complemented by strong protective requirements that are part of an H2A program and that are strongly enforced. And more importantly, I know that this is a grant program for growers, but I think it's really important for USDA to put out on the table that the trainings should not be left to growers or contractors, and that farm worker organizations should be supported accordingly to carry out worker rights training and training on worker health and safety, both in the US and in the sending countries. An education about the worker rights needs to be provided and included in writing when applying for and upon approval of their visa. And their visa should stipulate that as soon as the workers arrive to the US, a health and safety training and worker rights training will be provided before they start work. These trainings should take place before starting any work-related tasks, and regardless of the location, whether it's in the sending country or in the US, workers need to be on the clock and paid for their time during the training. How we do the training is also really important, and many of my colleagues in this room, as well as those doing farm worker trainings, have been successful for a number of reasons. And first and foremost is that the training is in a format that acknowledges the formal education level and the literacy level of workers. And often there isn't a lengthy formal education system that they've gone through, but they certainly have a lot of hands-on knowledge that they can that can be addressed and be incorporated into the training. So a training that incorporates theories of adult education, that engage the learner and builds on his or her experiences are really important. And these trainings need to be done, of course, in a language that the workers understand. And as we're seeing more Indigenous workers from Indigenous areas and different languages, we need to acknowledge that. And the trainings are often conducted by using the trusted train the trainer model, where workers or community health workers receive in-depth training in order to offer these trainings to the farm workers. At a minimum, there's a number of topics that should be included, from heat safety, pesticide safety, infectious disease, what to do in cases of emergencies. We've heard
Amy,
yes.
I hate to interrupt, but we have hit the 5-minute mark if you'd like to make any concluding remarks.
Yes, I'll just finish up with, there's I think a really long list of topics that are included in terms of health and safety, but I think it's important to acknowledge that the agricultural industry has a long history of farm worker exceptionalism, where farm workers have been historically afforded fewer protections than workers in other industries. And if we're really going to impact the health and safety of farm workers, we need to change that and do what's needed to improve the health and safety of all of our farm workers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy, for your comments. Up next, we have Yelisa Ambrose. Yelisa, have you joined us? If not, we are going to skip ahead and go to David Bacon. All right. Hi, David. You may begin. And David, your mic is muted.
Sorry.
There you go. You may begin.
Thank you. I'm David Bacon. I'm a journalist and fellow of the Oakland Institute, a former organizer for the United Farm Workers. The most important question the Agriculture Department should be asking about this pilot program is whether it will protect the jobs and promote the welfare of this country's farm workers. And the clear answer is no, it will not. Instead, it will make rich growers more wealthy, displace farm workers and endanger their jobs, and make poverty in farm worker communities even harder to change. It is morally wrong for the federal government to use tax money paid by working families, including farm workers, to subsidize growers and encourage them to use the H-2A program. It also contradicts what the president and his administration have said, that they want to protect the jobs of workers and protect workers' rights. The H-2A program has a long record of undermining both. It has resulted in the displacement of tens of thousands of farm workers living in the United States, and it has a long record of horrific violations of labor rights of workers brought to the US by growers using the H-2A visa. In the H-2A program, growers must advertise for local workers first, but there is zero enforcement and many suits by farm workers, including the current one by the state of Washington and the United Farm Workers at the Ostrom Mushroom Company in Washington state. Recruitment is done by large corporations and networks of private recruiters, which is notorious for illegally charging workers thousands of dollars for visas. Recruiters are exempt from anti-discrimination laws. They recruit almost all young men because they can work harder and faster. Employers can impose a production quota in this program and often fire and deport workers who don't make it. In fact, workers can be fired for any reason, and when they are, they must leave the country. Workers who are deported for being slow, protesting, or organizing are put on a blacklist and can't get hired again. H-2A workers have no right to organize or act collectively to change conditions, and when they've tried this, they've been uniformly fired and deported. This vulnerability impacts the organizing ability of local residents, since if they strike, they can be replaced. This is not legal, but it happens. Local workers are placed into competition with H-2A workers, where they work in the same farm, older workers and women compete against young men. One way local workers are forced to quit. Housing is often in rundown motels or barracks. During the pandemic, hundreds of H-2A workers became sick because they were packed too close and many workers died. We don't know exactly how many because the federal government, which should have kept track, did not. Growers in Washington state fought regulations to require the housing that wasn't so crowded, and that in fact caused the virus to spread. The adverse effect wage rate, or the H-2A wage, becomes a ceiling on wages. If local workers won't work for those wages, they can be replaced. This is a guarantee to growers of wages close to the minimum wage, and for workers, it is a guarantee of continued poverty. Last year, growers were certified to bring in 317,000 workers. This is at least 13% of the nation's farm labor workforce. This level of contract labor recruitment is impossible if local workers are not being replaced. And in fact, that is exactly what is happening right now in the southern San Joaquin Valley where I am right now. If the prohibition on hiring undocumented workers is strictly enforced, as the Farm Workforce Modernization Act would require, then the number of H-2A workers will rise enormously as growers use this program to replace the flow of undocumented people across the border. At the same time, hundreds of thousands of local farm workers will lose their jobs, throwing their families even further into poverty. Reforming the H-2A program is ineffective because the balance of power is so strongly in favor of growers. Workers remain vulnerable because of the structure of this program. Instead of throwing money at rich growers who don't need it, the Biden administration should use these funds to enforce labor laws, which are virtually unenforced in the case of H-2A and even local farm workers today, and instead do everything possible to stop the growth of this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. We're going to move on to our next speaker, and that is Christine Barker. I believe we have Christine on with us today. We'll give her a second to get on with us with her mic and video.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry for, anyway, I didn't realize it was coming on video. Good morning / afternoon, everyone. My name is Christine Barker, and I'm the Executive Director of Fresno Interdenominational Refugee Ministries, aka FIRM. in Fresno, California. And unlike many of you in the room, I am new to this space. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to share comments based in our expertise and experience working with refugees and immigrants from all around the world in the Central Valley of California. And I'm here today to primarily respond to the fourth question. Firm works with people who came to the US as refugees many years ago, and farm work is their primary source of income due to their expertise and also their previous lack of access to education, usually working for small scale specialty growers. These individuals that I have in mind have limited literacy and in their language using adult education best practices, as has been described earlier. Any pilot project being considered needs to ensure that there is language access to all crucial information and resources about worker rights in the languages spoken by farm workers. And Spanish is the start, but it is nowhere near the end. There are so many different languages spoken by farm workers, including Hmong, Laotian, Thai, Punjabi, and the many indigenous languages spoken in Mexico and Central America. I would also say that it takes a significant amount of and these languages are often not included in farm worker outreach or worker education as a whole. And so the federal government and many of our partners need to make sure that there is language access for all workers. I would also like to say that it's important to partner with CBOs or NGOs who are able to provide worker education because of the trust that they have already developed with the community, and that initial training is not enough, but ongoing support is always needed so that the workers, when something comes up, they know who they can call or they know what they can do to figure out how to navigate complex US systems. At Firm, we also work with people who have overstayed tourist visas from Southeast Asia, and they do not realize that worker rights apply to them even without having existing immigration status. It takes significant time and energy and effort to develop the trust needed in order for workers to disclose their status and vulnerability and help them believe that these laws actually apply to them as well. I'm sure the other callers and the other people who are speaking on this call have a lot more to say, and I'm eager to learn from all of you about this program and about the challenges that need to be overcome to support the farm workers we have here in the US right now and ensure that H-2A visas are not exploiting new workers or workers that are here now. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to learning more.
Thank you, Christine, for your comments. We're going to move through our list of speakers, and if we call out a name and the speaker isn't here, we will circle back at the end of the call to try to catch any of those folks we may have skipped over. So up next is Melissa Castillo. How about Robert Crudup? Luz Gallegos. And I think our next speaker up is present with us today, Rosalinda Dickey. All right.
Thank you.
I will start your time. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Rosalinda Dickey, Executive Director of Community to Community Development, a farm worker advocacy, food justice, and food sovereignty organization based in Northwest Washington State. I'm speaking to you from McConnell, Washington, from the land of the Swinomish people, which has been caretaken by them since time immemorial, and it's why we have such great agricultural land and seafood. So I would like to start my comments by saying that we believe that this grant program to the agricultural industry is a gift that they've been waiting for and asking for a long time. It's a way to continue to disregard the present rights and regulations to protect farm worker workplace, to implement farm worker workplace protection. We've been fighting for years. My organization is 20 plus years old, and we've been working both at the state level and the national level to improve protections for farm workers in the United States. And so to bring in this farm labor stabilization and protection pilot grant program, even the name of the program is insulting to farm workers that have been in the United States for generations trying to improve their working conditions and their wages. So what I would like to say is that there are so many reasons and so many ways to improve this grant program that it could go on and on for hours and hours. Because the advocacy that we have been doing as a farm worker, I am a farm worker in the United States, and we have seen deaths and injuries to H-2A workers because this program has been continuously, and it continues to get more and more aggravated and exploitative. It is so much so that we call it a quasi-slave labor program. And to be able to give this gift of funding to large corporate agriculture so that this can continue and expand is an insult to the farm workers that are in the United States today that have been displaced and are trying to improve their wages and find work. We believe that for greater accountability and control of this pilot program, we strongly recommend not extending the scope of the pilot grant to growers that source labor from Mexico. Additionally, internationalizing this quasi-slave labor program and giving exploitative employers money to do it, again, is offensive. But we want to see that farm worker protections are enhanced during the recruitment and employment if this program happens to go through. That this program can make, or this grant program can make H-2A enforcement agencies at the state levels, such in Washington State, the Department of Labor, Employment Security Department, Department of Labor and Industries, the Department of Health, and other agencies to create oversight committees, such as the committee we created here in Washington State. The Washington's Agricultural Seasonal Workforce Services Advisory Committee should be eligible to receive pilot grant funding. Because we are appointed by the state governor, we represent employers and workers, and we provide oversight to protect domestic workers' rights and also H-2A workers' rights. We believe that to ensure compliance of additional standards required by the recipients of this grant, the FSA should prohibit agricultural employer organizations and employers, and also I could say the international labor contractors that go and mislead farm workers to come to the United States in this program, who are not in compliance and have actually had deaths on their farms. They should be prohibited because they're not following existing H-2A regulations and policies. They should be prohibited from receiving any of this pilot grant funding. The United States Department of Labor right now maintains a list of these debarred growers, and they should be debarred if there is a worker that dies because of negligence from the farmer that brought them here from other countries. Also, this should include the growers that are currently being investigated for non-compliance of existing H-2A regulations and worker protections according to the state laws for providing worker protections for domestic workers and H-2A workers. Additionally, we believe that the administration of any H-2A related program should not move to the United States Department of Agriculture. It is an offense and also a very bad decision to move labor issues from the Department of Labor to the Department of Agriculture, mainly because we're workers. We're not like a commodity that the agricultural industry can move around. So it is disrespectful to move it to the United States Department of Agriculture when this department should be more concerned about the direct production of food and not with the labor component of it.
And that is our 5-minute mark if you want to make a final concluding statement.
We definitely believe that farm labor policy should be kept totally separate from immigration reform or anything to do with immigration. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your comments. We are ready to move on to our next speaker, and that is Elizabeth Henderson. And I believe Ms. Henderson is on the line, so we'll give her a second to get her microphone unmuted. All right, you may begin.
Good afternoon. I'm Elizabeth Henderson. I am the chair of the board of the Agricultural Justice Project. And yesterday, our general coordinator, Leah Cohen, spoke. So I will not repeat the things that she said because I agree with them, and I hope that you will pay attention to them and read them in our written submission. But what I wanted to say, in addition, is that having been a farmer myself, I know that there are many of the smaller farms who are not guilty of the kinds of major violations of labor rights that Rosalinda Dickey has just referred to. There are ethical farmers who really want to run good, organic, certified organic farms and treat the earth in a decent way, as well as the people who work for them. So when they use H2A, they hire directly without using recruiters, even traveling to Mexico themselves in order to sign people up. They get the same workers year after year and have respectful relationships with them. But they particularly appreciate the hard work of people with farm skills who are in the United States to earn as much money as possible to send home and will work 70, 80, 90 hours in a week in order to do that, even if it doesn't get time and a half for overtime. But I would like to put on record that the best farmers, the truly ethical farmers who are trying to run just and agroecological farms, do not hire H2A workers. They contribute to building a domestic labor force, and they would hire the undocumented workers who are here if they were not threatened by being charged with a felony if they were found to have knowingly hired an undocumented person. These farmers only ask 40, maybe 42, 45 hours a week of work from their employees, except under very exceptional circumstances. They've learned that you get the best quality of work from workers who have a life outside the farm. Tinkering around the edges with a basically unjust program like H2A will not solve the farm labor dilemma in this country. There is plenty of money in food. We have seen during the pandemic and this past year that the biggest food and farm business companies are increasing their profits. Companies like Tyson, Walmart, Amazon, their profits have been stolen from the workers and from the farmers who do the work to produce the food that must be put on people's tables. If we want a system of food production in this country that is respectful of people and land and livestock, we need to take the money back from the big companies that are stealing. We need to tax these huge windfall profits and profiteering. And we need to create a system that is fair to farmers and farm workers alike, that doesn't depend on importing guest workers. So thank you for this opportunity to say that.
Thank you very much for your comments. Up next on our list is Sarah Hulick. I'm not sure Sarah is joining us at the moment, so we're going to move ahead to Aaron Jacobson. I do think Aaron is on with us.
Hey, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You may begin.
Okay. Thank you. So my name is Aaron Jacobson. I am an attorney with the Legal Aid of North Carolina Farm Worker Unit in North Carolina. We represent H-2A workers across the state of North Carolina and other survivors of human trafficking or other victims of violent crime that fall within the LSC regulations. Having said that, what I wanted to do today was just share our recent experience on the ground the last few years. And I think at some point I'm going to frame it from the perspective of a few clients of ours in the last 3 years that have been subjected to labor trafficking schemes. So I guess as a brief overview, what I wanted to start with was that, and so in North Carolina, particularly in Eastern North Carolina, the past 4 years, we've seen an explosion of labor trafficking, incidents of labor trafficking that almost to a T involved the same trafficking scheme, which involved the charging of exorbitant unlawful recruitment fees, the non-reimbursement of travel costs, albeit unlawful, both of those, and threats of, well, confiscation of identification documents and threats to family members in the sending countries that if they complain, if they take any action, or if they leave their employ, their family members will be harmed in their home countries. Some of the recruiting agents, according to our clients, also have mafia-like links, according to the clients, in their home countries. And we've also seen a pretty drastic increase in the targeting of indigenous communities in southern Mexico. So I say that more anecdotally, but I think it's also, I can also point to a complaint that was filed in federal court in 2020, 2 years ago, and 2 complaints that are pending now. And I believe a couple more complaints that will be filed in the next year or so, all alleging violations of the TVPRA, the Trafficking Victims Protection and Reauthorization Act, and all alleging labor trafficking schemes. So, to start, I guess let me just share the experiences. So I'm going to try to frame this from the perspective of a few clients in the past couple of years. So we'll call one Joe, the other Rachel. So Joe was recruited in 2018 Joe's from Chiapas, was recruited by a recruiting agent who was authorized to employ H-2A workers in North Carolina, paid a 40,000 peso recruitment fee, which Joe didn't know was unlawful. And then, of course, Joe had to take out numerous loans to pay that fee. That's a fee that Joe might be able to earn in Chiapas, working maybe for, I don't know, a year. He was recruited via false promises of great pay. Once he arrived in North Carolina, he worked 1 week, and I think he made about $2 an hour. He was told he'd be reimbursed his reimbursement, his travel costs by law, which he has to be reimbursed in his first paycheck. He didn't get that reimbursement until 2 years later via settlement after a lawsuit was filed. So I guess all these clients, you could say, to some extent, they've been able to vindicate their rights 2 years later, right? And so after, I guess I think we would submit that is, those lawsuits are kind of like a Band-Aid on the growing crisis we're seeing in with respect to labor trafficking and incidents of labor trafficking involving the same fact pattern of recruitment fees. Am I already at that time?
30 seconds.
Wow. Okay. Let me summarize. So to summarize, I would say that I think one, in terms of recommendations, expanding this program, which is already rife with abuse in the recruitment process, to an area, to the Northern Triangle, where there's a large number of people seeking asylum based on gang recruitment, I think is concerning. The other recommendation I would make is that requiring employers to pay the travel costs out of pocket would go a good way to alleviate vulnerability to trafficking if those costs are paid by the employer upfront and not put on the employees.
And that is time, unfortunately. Mr. Jacobson, thank you so much for your comments. Okay, up next we have Christelle Jensen, who I believe we do have on with us today.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, you may begin.
Thank you. Good morning. Well, good afternoon from where you are. My name is Christelle Jensen. I am the community-driven strategist with the California Institute for Rural Studies. We've been active in different parts of rural California and rural areas across the United States for more than 40 years. And we are an independent research institute. Recently, we have been participating and directly engaging, organizing, and listening from community partners who have been part of the struggle for many, many years. And as of right now, the California Institute for Rural Studies, it is analyzing the different forms that the H-2A program has existed in the past. And this is going to take us to the binational movement of survivors of 4.6 million farm workers and indigenous Mexicans who participated in the Bracero program from 1942 to 1964, which under an agreement between the United States and Mexico was established in order to provide farm worker labor in times of World War II and began in 1988. Thousands of grandparents and widows and children of the deceased demand the payment of the 10% of the salary that the United States deducted from their salary to create a saving fund, which was supposed to be delivered to farm workers at the end of their contract through Banco Ban Rural in Mexico. To date, the governments responsible for this historical fraud have not responded. The now survivors active in the Bracero movement, a community of grandfathers and grandmothers, a defenseless community, economically and physically vulnerable, are dying in the trenches of the struggle, burying their hope for justice and delivering a legacy of values for those who take on task of asserting their right to live with dignity and respect. And this is why we're here. So that the patterns of the Bracero program, which are very much present in the current form and the structure of the H-2A program, are not repeated. So that this form of slavery is not expanded in the country, and the form of violence that are being presented in the countries of origin of these migrant and undocumented indigenous workers are still very present. Instead, we would like for the USDA, for the Biden administration, and all the agencies whose interests are paying attention into expanding the current form of the H-2A program, to advocate for a comprehensive and inclusive immigration reform that will benefit all farm workers and their family members, to expand and invest so that livable salaries that are reflective of the fact that California agriculture in this country is a multi-billion-dollar industry that doesn't need more money, with professional benefits, including sick, disability, and maternity and parental leave, retirement plans, and overtime for all campesinos, farm workers, regardless of their citizen status. Access to government-funded safety net, unemployment, and emergency and disaster assistance programs that are easy to access, culturally inclusive, and do not have burdensome eligibility requirements. The creation of a new agricultural worker-specific agency that is empowered, staffed, and funded to enforce all agricultural workplace health, hygiene, and safety regulations, including COVID-19 and wildfire smoke guidelines, are honored and respected and are within code. As it currently formed, The Cal OSHA agency is too centralized and does not work for indigenous campesinos. The creation of a network of a county-based regional external accountability committees composed of workers, farm workers specifically, CBOs and allies who can ensure that this new state agency enforces the law to ensure farm workers have safe and healthy work environments and direct lines of communication to those in charge of enforcing health and safety regulations. These committees can advance and grounded solutions offered by indigenous farm workers who know what works and what doesn't. Access to quality healthcare, including emotional health support that is culturally and linguistically appropriate. Guaranteed and increased units of dignified housing in good and safe condition with heat and air conditioning, functioning electricity, plumbing, laundry, internet service, and areas of recreation and play with enough space for everyone in the household at affordable or subsidized rates for resident campesinos already established in this country.
We have hit the 5-minute mark if you want to make one final concluding statement.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time. These are the suggestions. These are suggestions directly from the workers. And I really, really hope that the agencies currently involved and the current government stops these forms of this form of slavery from advancing in this country.
Thank you so much for joining us today and providing your comments. We have one more speaker and then we are going to take a brief break. So we will pull up Alfredo Juarez Zafrino. Alfredo, I believe you are on with us.
Yes, I'm here.
All right, you may begin.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alfredo Juarez Zafrino. I am a Mayan. I'm from the south of Mexico. So I speak Spanish, English, and Mixteco. So I speak 3 languages. And I am a farm worker here in Skagit in Whatcom County in Washington State. Last year, I went to pick strawberry in California. And that's something that my whole family used to do. We work in California and then move up to Washington and then go back to California. We used to travel a lot, but now we have stayed mostly here in Washington State for over 10 years. And so I alone went in California to pick strawberry. I've been a farm worker for more than 10 years now. So here is something that I have seen. So like I said, I've been a farm worker for over 10 years. I am a member of Familias Unidas por la Justicia, a farm worker union here in Washington State and community to community of development. So here is something I have seen every year at the beginning of each picking season. Huge number of workers show up to work, but because of the company pays very little, and also a lot of the supervisor, they are very mean to workers. The workers then go out and look for work where they get paid a little bit more and the working conditions are a bit nicer. So better pay and better working condition, workers will stay from the start to the end of harvest season. A lot of the time, farm workers show up to apply for work and they are told, we are not hiring right now. We have a lot of work already. Put your name on and phone number on the waiting list and we will call you when we need more workers. Companies are not hiring workers that are here ready to work and later go apply for H-2A because they don't have enough worker, knowing well that they have turned away a lot of farm workers that were here ready to work. The price of everything is going up. The price of food, the price of gas, and rents are all going up. The resources should go to farm workers, not companies that make hundreds of thousands and millions in profit each year. Again, the resource should go to farm workers that are here because they contribute with their hard work every day and also pay taxes on everything like everybody else in the community. The current farm worker protection or not being applied at a lot of the workplace because there isn't anybody in the government making sure that farm workers are protected. For example, the heat rule here in Washington State, in the summer it was very hot and a lot of the workers didn't have a lot of drinking water, and a lot of workers didn't know that the heat rule existed because the company didn't tell them about it. And so we, the farm worker, have been here in the US. We contribute with our work and pay taxes every day. Our answer to the H-2A program is no. No to the expansion of H-2A program. That's all I have.
Thank you so much for providing that feedback. Okay, and with that, we will be taking a 5-minute break. So that looks like it'll bring us back at 3:02 Eastern time. So we look forward to seeing you after that break. Okay, welcome back from the break, everyone. We will pick up right where we left off and go to Tomas Madrigal for our next speaker. Tomas?
Naradansky. Quiero pedirles permiso a los demás campesinos y trabajadores agrícolas que están en la llamada para tomar la palabra. My name is Tomas Madrigal. I am the food systems researcher at Community to Community Development. You've heard two of my colleagues, Alfredo and Rosalinda Dickey, share some of our talking points, and I will share a couple more that we've developed in response to the questions that you had. For greater accountability in enhancing farm worker protections, the FSA should limit the use of grant funds to the United States of America. Funds should not be used to build foreign recruitment infrastructure, and funds should not be used to subsidize airfare from the sending country. That said, in order to enhance farm labor stabilization, to encourage informal worker-to-worker recruitment by H-2A workers from this Northern Triangle area, the return flights upon return, the FSA should allow grant funds to be used to provide existing workers an incentive bonus to return to their employment in the United States at the end of their service and given to them before they depart from the United States of America. And then to increase farm worker awareness of their resources and worker rights, the FSA can require grant recipients to use a percentage of their award to provide education materials to H-2A workers about the protections that they already have. These should be in the languages used by H-2A workers from the Northern Triangle, including Spanish, Mam, Canjobal, Quiche, and Ahuateco, and also that's in a format that is accessible to those H-2A workers, including videos and visual presentations. In relation to the larger issue that we're skirting, existing regulations to protect H-2A agricultural workers should not be reduced or reformed in the favor of agricultural employers. This includes protecting existing labor regulations and policies that allow the access of labor unions, for example, to the workers. This includes wage protections, and this includes housing requirements, and this includes the limited scope of the use of the H-2A program. It is our position that adequate investment of resources and fundings to federal administration agencies will also result in improving the paperwork, filing, renewal, and enforcement processes that we heard about yesterday being a prime issue. I would like to close my comment by referring to the USDA's Economic Research Service, which maintains a record of the agricultural productivity in the United States since World War II. Productivity and total agricultural output has risen in the United States 3 times, while the total number of farm inputs has remained stagnant. This includes the cost of labor. For farm labor stabilization and protection, farm worker wages should be tied to their productivity. Wages should be 3 times the minimum wage in 1960. Adjusted for inflation, that is $9.48 minimum wage, and 3 times that is $28.44, which is greater than most state minimum wages and most AWARD determinations. That might be an incentive that this grant funding could be used to encourage employers to have a more equitable relationship with their workers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Up next, we have Ahmed Majid, followed by Aquile Marciano. And then after that will be Greg Schell. So it looks like we've got our next speaker up and you may begin.
Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Good day wherever you are in your time zone. Thank you to those who have spoke, especially from what I've heard, those who have been in the space in terms of farm worker advocacy for a much longer time than me. My name is Ahmad Majid. Ahmed is an alternative that I also accept. And I'm here representing the Central Valley Neighborhood Harvest Community Garden in some respect, but I have to also say that I'm representing myself as a Black and Indigenous person. I'm a beginning farmer, also rancher. And so more or less, that's a bit about my stake in the space. And I also have friends who are children of farm workers. I live in the Central Valley. This is something that is deeply personal, and I want to respectfully warn everyone to listen to farm workers. This program, as it has existed and exists, is too near servitude slavery. The dynamics are offset in a way that is startling. I'm only just researching the particular H-2A program that we're discussing today, but even with limited knowledge, which is what brought me here, I knew that I would hear what I heard from those who have been in the space. Again, this is a respectful warning as a spiritual person. Whether you respect that or not, listen to farm workers. If you're going to enhance or change anything, the program should be directed majority to issues around farm worker and farm worker family, including children, their wraparound safety. Let's think about how to handle the fact that if you don't meet a quota, you don't just lose your job, you're deported. You want to talk about inequity? That's a hell of a setup, pardon me. Onward, in terms of recommendations, I feel like something like a farm worker family success steward infrastructure. And that's something that I made up in my mind because I feel like those words will resonate, would help to handle some of the issues we're talking about, but they're going to need to be addressed head on, unabashedly, okay? In addition to that, in terms of making the program attractive, you're going to have to raise wages. This is a job, regardless of whether you're a citizen or not, is a $20 plus an hour job any day. So let's be serious if we're going to do anything and do something like that. Furthermore, in terms of the socio-cultural economic shock, most of these folks hardly read or write in their own language. How do you expect them to navigate their legal rights in a totally new area where we have people who abuse the system? And also respecting what I've heard about, typically it is the smaller farms that don't have this mindset of white supremacy and slavery for whatever reason. And there are good stewards who are utilizing the program responsibly. We need to be able to identify that and support those and amplify those spaces. But again, don't turn a blind eye to what we know is happening. I don't know where I am on time, but I will.
You have 15 seconds left if you want to make any concluding remarks.
I'll just say again, listen to farm workers. This is too close to slavery and we're too far away from slavery. So if we're going to do anything, let's make this about the farm workers. They are essential. They are the major piece and the most important part. Thank you for being present and thank you for allowing me to share.
Thank you so much, Ahmad. All right, up next on our list, we have Achilles Marciano, and then after him, we have Greg Schell, followed by Mark Stewart. Is Achilles on? Don't believe so. We're going to move on to Greg Schell. Greg?
You can hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, and I will start your time now.
Okay. My name is, okay, go ahead. My name is Greg Schell, and for the past 43 years, I've worked as an attorney representing migrant farm workers, including guest workers, including domestic workers. I've been involved with several cases that really have a bearing on what you're looking at today. And I'd like to start, first of all, with a case I did, which went to the 11th Circuit in 2019, Pama Ulloa versus Fancy Farms. And the reason that case is instructive is it involved guest workers, H-2A workers from Honduras, over 100 of them. And the Court of Appeals found that they all paid $3,000 to $4,000 apiece to their recruit. And the enforcement systems at the consulate, enforcement systems at the Department of Labor, none of them caught this. And so we have a problem. And I'm just using that to illustrate the problem. That workers will, as we all know, pay large amounts of money to participate in this program. And to the extent we can move from the informal recruitment system, which was in that the Palma Ulloa case and is in most of recruitment of H-2As currently, the better. Now, the second case I'd like to talk about is a case I did that was decided in 2002 that is important here, and it touches on several of the topics that have been raised. It's called Arriaga versus Florida Pacific Farms. And that case established that employers are required to reimburse to the worker in the first employment the costs of their primarily for the benefit of the employer, to the extent they bring them below the federal minimum wage. And subsequent Department of Labor rulings have said that actually it extends to expenses that bring their earnings for the first week below the guaranteed adverse effect wage rate. Those expenses include their inbound transportation. It includes their lodging while waiting their time being processed at the embassy. It includes any border crossing fees as well as any visa expenses. Those, and what you heard from Mr. Jacobson earlier, is that apparently those requirements are being ignored by many, many farms. And of course, this immediately leaves the worker who may have borrowed these funds to get here. If he doesn't get reimbursed those funds, he's immediately in debt. And it sort of lays the stage for potential labor trafficking. The worker is in debt, needs to pay back whoever he borrowed the money from in his home country, very vulnerable, even more vulnerable when he first arrived. The Arriaga decision is important for a number of reasons. Besides getting the money back to the worker, it's important to understand what it does. It creates two incentives that are important to our discussion. Number one, because the travel costs are less from Northern Central America, it creates a powerful incentive for employers to hire from those countries. Before Arriaga, there was a move by employers to hire workers from even poorer countries in Africa and Asia. Given the differential in costs, this is a powerful incentive. Arriaga is properly followed to hire workers that are near where the transportation costs are substantially less. Now, the other thing Arriaga does is, of course, if I've paid the money back, if I'm an employer who's reimbursed the money in the first week, I'm going to be far less inclined to terminate that worker abruptly, which prior to Arriaga, a worker would arrive and the employer said, well, gee, he's not that fast. He's a guest worker. I haven't invested any money because I haven't reimbursed him. I'll fire him and get somebody else. That Arriaga has really curbed that practice, and that is the benefit of workers who invest all this money to come here and in the prior to Arriaga found themselves frequently terminated briefly. So enforcement of Arriaga and reimbursement of expenses is critical in any program. The other thing I'd like to talk about is how this plays out with, well, two other things. First of all, there was a mention of discrimination. Yes, discrimination. And there was a comment that was made which was not entirely, fortunately, true. It says, well, gee, employers are allowed to discriminate when they hire foreign workers. Well, yes and no. There is one appeals court, but only one appeals court that has said that. And I would suggest, I think it's difficult for the Department of Labor and the Department of Agriculture to support a program that allows employers to discriminate. I use the example of South African H-2A workers, of which there are several thousand. South Africa is 8% white, yet 100% of the H-2As coming to the United States from South Africa are white. Now that's obviously racial discrimination. I cannot believe the administration supports that, and the same requirements that apply to H-2A employers when hiring foreign work or domestic workers, in other words, they're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of race or gender, should apply.
Now, that is 5 minutes if you want to make any final remarks.
Yeah, finally, domestic workers should be hired. And the proof is there are lots of African-American workers. They're not being hired. See the New York Times, November 21st, 2021. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next speaker on the list is Mark Stewart, followed by Maria Elena Valdivia, and then Andrew Walchuk. So we'll start. I don't believe we have Mark Stewart. We'll move down to Maria Elena. And I do think we have Andrew Walchuk on the line. And Letitia Zalvala, sorry, you'll be up next, Letitia. Andrew, you may begin.
Thanks so much. And first, my name's Andrew Walchuk. I am with Farmworker Justice in DC, and we're an organization that has spent decades working to improve the living and working conditions of farm workers, both domestic and H-2A workers. And first, I just want to thank USDA for holding this listening session. We appreciate that the agency is finally taking steps to see farm workers as key stakeholders in the agency's activities, not merely as a labor input or, as Rosalinda Dickey noted earlier, a commodity. But one listening session is obviously not going to be enough. Changing direction is going to require consistent outreach and clear positive results for farm workers to earn their trust and the trust of their advocates. But at the outset, I want to address a couple of the priorities before getting into the questions, the priorities that USDA has listed for this pilot program. The first stated priority of the pilot is to address current labor shortages in agriculture. But using the H-2A program to fix US agricultural labor shortages is like a fire truck pulling up to a burning building and just spraying down the house next door. It's not getting at the problem. If employers are saying that US workers don't want the jobs they're offering, USDA should be asking why. We should be making agricultural jobs better jobs for US workers. We know that you're not a labor enforcement agency, and we want USDA to continue to defer to and work with labor partners at the Department of Labor and state labor agencies. But if you are going to run an incentive program for employers, it should be used to address the long-standing injustices that farm workers face. USDA should be incentivizing employers to pay farm workers overtime and better wages. It should be incentivizing employers to allow unionization efforts in the workplace, and it should be incentivizing employers to provide safer workplaces where workers can take a break to avoid heat stress and workers can avoid the dangers of pesticide exposure. A second listed priority of the pilot program is to encourage migration through lawful pathways. I just want to emphasize what so many of the speakers on this call have already pointed out. Just because the H-2A visa is lawful does not mean that it is good. We have seen ample evidence that the disproportionate control that H-2A employers have over workers is dangerous for workers. The workers may be here lawfully, but many employers are not law-abiding. You've heard about the horrific trafficking of thousands of H-2A workers in the Blooming Onion case, and just this week, a major H-2A labor contractor named Vladimir Moreno pled guilty to federal conspiracy and forced labor charges in a scheme that covered multiple states. The violations are real and they're ongoing. But now I'll move to the questions that you posed. First, you asked about the challenges that workers from Central America face. They're numerous, but I'll focus on a few. One is the lack of access to alternative avenues. There are many other legal ways to come to the US, and it's troubling to see the US government put so much effort behind H-2A and triumphantly incentivize expansion of a program that exploits workers. While at the same time, we're telling asylum seekers do not come. When we do not provide information about other options and realistic access to these options, we risk forcing vulnerable asylum seekers and humanitarian migrants into a program that does not meet their needs and risks putting them directly in further harm's way. We've heard multiple speakers talk about the way that economic interests, such as debts or concern about getting a job in the following season, keep H-2A workers in dangerous situations. But it's only worse when employees are have critical fears for their life and safety upon return. A second issue they face is lack of access to rights information. The Wilberforce pamphlet provided to H-2A workers is a start, but workers need much, much more information. There are rights specific to H-2A workers that are not covered in the pamphlet, and they need explanations of what those rights mean. They should be provided training before departure and while in the US, and that education should be provided by workers' rights advocates who have experience in the issues. In addition to the trafficking hotline, they should have access to numbers for legal aid and other service providers. I'll also say that the workers face a lot of recruitment issues. I think you've heard some about that, so I'll move on. But recommendations to enhance farm worker protections while in the US. Your second question asks about a safer, healthier worker environment, but the aim should be a safer, healthier, and fairer worker environment. The power imbalance between employers and H-2A workers is at the heart of the violations in the program. They aren't just health and safety violations, but there's also rampant wage theft and other coercive behavior that we see occur. One way you can improve H-2A workplaces is by strengthening the ability of H-2A workers to leave those workplaces that violate their rights and find new jobs. There are small measures that DHS and DOL can take, like providing a longer visa grace period or allowing workers to challenge abscondment notices. But overall, we need a new model that's less centered on employer control. But the key point I want you to take away on this question is that enforcement and verification cannot depend on employers and regulators alone. Workers themselves have to play a central role in enforcement, and these funds should be used to empower them to do that. Regulatory protections and rights education are useless if workers do not feel safe coming forward. And I'll point to the example of Flock in North Carolina. They have a bargaining agreement that covers a large number of workers, and we see good complaint mechanisms there. We see a way for workers to raise issues that they're seeing and be in communication with advocates from their arrival through their departure and return.
And that is our 5 minutes.
All right, well, I will just wrap up with the point that these workers, generally, the funds need to be directed towards empowering workers, and the strings that are attached to the funds, if they are going to employers, need to be incentives that allow employers to make sure that workers have the power that they need in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Up next, we have Leticia Zavala. I believe you are on with us. Leticia? Okay, we will move on to our next speaker and we can circle back later for you. We'll go on to Lucas Zucker. Lucas, are you on? Okay. What about Sarah Martinez? All right, we will try next Cynthia Rice. And following Cynthia, we'll have Jeannie Economos.
Good afternoon.
Cynthia, are you on?
Yes, good afternoon.
All right, I will begin your time.
Thank you very much. My name is Cynthia Rice. I'm from California Rural Legal Assistance, a statewide legal services program in California that's been providing legal representation to farm workers since 1963. In the last 20 years, actually really focused in the last 10 to 15 years, California has seen a tremendous increase in the influx of H-2A workers and the use of that program by our agricultural growers and farm labor contractors. This influx, this increase has resulted in, excuse me, the artificial combination of work sites and crop activities under job orders, displacement of, in particular, older and female agricultural workers. And we have recovered millions of dollars against agricultural employers who use the H-2A program as a result of violations of both California, federal, and H-2A provisions protecting these workers. But most of those employers, farm labor contractor and grower alike, continue to be certified as H-2A employers under the system. There is simply no accountability, even when workers have recovered money as a result of the violations that they have suffered. One of the fundamental elements of the statutory authorization for the H-2A program is the notion that the use of the H-2A program may not result in a displacement of U.S. workers or a reduction of the working conditions and wages for those workers. So the question that really needs to begin, that the agency really needs to begin with is it appropriate? Is it consistent with that fundamental notion to provide funding, grant money to employers who are going to use H-2A workers instead of domestic workers? And as Ms. Gann and others pointed out, we think that that question must be seriously considered when looking at the pilot program and whether or not any grants money at all should be used to support employers who are providing who are using those funds to bring in H-2A workers. With respect to if that program does go forward, then one would assume that the Department of Agriculture will take the position that those getting the funding will be the best growers and the best farm labor contractors if they're eligible. And as many of the individuals who have testified earlier have reflected, there are very good growers, there are very good farm labor contractors that have union representation, that provide higher levels of benefits, that provide sick leave, and have an exemplary record with respect to compliance with state, local, and federal worker and health and safety protection. It is only that group of employers that should be eligible for a pilot program such as this if it does go forward. And so higher level of screening needs to be applied with respect to the applicants of this program to ensure that those applicants have not had a citation or lawsuit judgment entered against them in relation to any workforce practice or any housing practice related to their employment. Additionally, one of our greatest frustrations is that DOL, as was pointed out before, has limited enforcement capabilities or will step aside from a complaint about a particular violation, leaving us to bring a lawsuit. 90% of those lawsuits result in settlement and not an active judgment against the employer. Yet the fact that an employer might have paid $1 million or more to resolve wage and hour complaints brought by H-2A workers is not taken into consideration in determining whether or not they are eligible to be in the H-2A program, much less should they be debarred. That should change if you're going to give taxpayer money in the pilot program to an H-2A employer or farm labor contractor. Should be taken into consideration whether or not that grower or FLC has been sued and entered into a voluntary settlement agreement, either with a government agency or with a private practitioner. Additionally, to answer a couple of questions with respect to barriers. As noted earlier, recruitment violations continue to be reported, and the grower or a farmer or contractor avoids liability by taking the position that they don't do the direct recruitment, they have no liability. So there should be strict liability extended under this program for any complaints with respect to unlawful recruitment costs. It is also important, as many commenters have already indicated, that USDOL and the state workforce agency, as well as labor protection agencies, remain the primary enforcers and reviewers of compliance with the H-2A program. And that this
that is our 5 minutes, if you want to make one final concluding remark.
And that this not be a shift to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And again, critically important, as pointed out before, is notice and training to H-2A workers must be required under this pilot program, particularly because state and local protections are much greater than those that are summarized in the H-2A orders, particularly in states like California, Washington, and Oregon. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. We're going to move on to our next speaker, and that is Jeannie Economos. I don't believe that Jeannie is on with us, so we will call out the next speaker, which is Donald Ransom. Okay, don't believe Donald is on either. How about Diana Padilla? And on deck after Diana is Tara Villalba.
Jeannie is in Florida and they are being walloped right now by that storm.
I noticed that as well, and I hope that all is well with her. So Diana, are you on with us?
I am, and I spoke on a previous listen session, and this computer doesn't have a camera, so I'll make it really quick.
Okay.
Comment. The person that spoke three persons before Mr. Andrew actually hit it on the head. I'm a US citizen and I am a farmer and I am a farmer mentor. And I question myself, H-2A is a great idea because there's people out there who really want to do agriculture, but what is the problem that US citizens are not wanting to do it? If we have to accommodate all of the, give the resources to people from other countries, there should be some way that we offer the same to people in the United States. That's basically the same thing that he said. We need to find a solution for our US farm workers while we're addressing the issues of the H-2 visas. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Up next is Tara Villalba. Tara, I believe you are on. And on deck, we have Keely Sorensen. Tara,
thank you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, you may begin.
Great. Thank you so much. Just 1 second here. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts here today. The question here today is, what will the USDA Farm Service Agency do to provide structure that will ensure worker justice and protect the organizing power of workers and thus our larger economy so that everyone can live dignified lives? The H-2A program is an exploitative program that ignores the needs of farm workers who are already in the US. The main problem with the H-2A program is that it is legalized human trafficking with similar vulnerabilities that we also find in illegal human trafficking. The power differential between workers and their employers are based on the US history of agriculture and enslavement of Black agricultural workers. And the people who benefit from this arrangement are the growers and agricultural employers at the expense of all agricultural workers. Given this, how will the USDA Farm Service Agency ensure real worker protection and worker dignity? I'm here as a renter here in Bellingham, Washington. I'm here as a community member in a border town. And I'm here to say that for community stability, the FSA should allow grant funds to be used to provide existing workers an incentive bonus to return to their employment in the United States at the end of their service before they depart at the end of their term here. It is disruptive to not know where your next paycheck is going to come from, where you're going to live and work in the next season, and employers must be required to provide that type of stability to their workers. In order to facilitate the integration of farm workers into our communities and to truly protect themselves, the FSA can require grant recipients to provide education materials to H-2A workers about the protections that they already have in languages used by the H-2A workers themselves, in a format that is accessible to H-2A workers, including video and visual forms. Workers should be allowed to seek community housing instead of being confined to their workplace. Rather than directing resources towards agricultural employers for improving housing, these resources should be given to the farm workers, paid to them, so they can seek community housing in the communities where they live and work. Agricultural employers should be subject to state housing laws. Separating farm workers from the communities they live in makes them more vulnerable to landlord abuse and isolation. Agricultural employers who also act as landlords must be regulated as landlords as well. And any resources from this grant allocated for housing should be used to enforce housing regulations for domestic agricultural workers as well. It doesn't serve anyone to divide our agricultural workforce. Existing labor regulations should not be reduced or reformed in favor of agricultural employers and at the expense of farm workers. This includes protecting existing labor protections and policies, wage protections, safe and secure housing requirements, and limiting the scope of the use of the H-2A program. Every worker's right to organize should be respected. Labor unions must be allowed expanded access to H-2A workers internationally. Farm worker unions are not the largest threat to the well-being of farm workers. It is the agricultural employers' threats, harassment, and intimidation that threaten workers from exercising their legally protected rights to organize and improve their working conditions. No money or resource should be used to discourage union participation by farm workers. As a member of the Bellingham Immigration Advisory Board and as a member of border communities in Washington State, farm labor policy should be separate from immigration policy. Combining and conflating the two encourages the racial profiling of immigrants of color by border and law enforcement agencies roaming in our communities. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you very much, Tara. So our next speaker on the list is Keely Sorensen. Keely, are you on? Okay, we're gonna skip ahead to Dorian Slaybod. And after Dorian will be Hector Rodriguez. Dorian, are you with us?
I am. Thank you.
Okay, you may begin.
Great. My name is Dorian Slaybod. I'm a staff attorney with Farmworker Legal Services based in Michigan. I'm in Grand Rapids. Our organization has been around for 25 years, and we represent seasonal migrant farm workers who work here in Michigan, including H-2A workers. I want to thank USDA for having this open comment period, and I want to thank a lot of the people who have presented before me, a lot of very moving comments and things for me to think more about. And so I appreciate that time as well. For my few minutes here, I wanted to just touch base on a few of the larger issues that we see with H-2A workers and the things that they deal with on a routine basis, and then talk about some of the infrastructure that exists that USDA might consider tapping into. So I know it was mentioned before, but generally speaking, H-2A workers have to front the costs of travel. So if they're coming from Mexico or Central America, as we're discussing here today, you're looking at hundreds of dollars spent to travel before you even have an opportunity to work a single day. this puts you in a place of desperation and vulnerability. And it's true that the regulations and the case law that Greg Schell mentioned are supposed to ensure that this reimbursement happens quickly, that the employer pays the worker back quickly, and that this shouldn't be a burden. But oftentimes, workers do not receive the full reimbursement right away. And they may not without legal intervention. And this also applies to the cost of travel to return to their home location as well. And we see this. We see workers not receive reimbursement at all or partial reimbursement for years, which leads me into my second point, which is the concern for HRA workers of being blacklisted, of not being able to return to work. And that's the main reason that a lot of times workers take a very smart in their consideration and sober realization of doing a cost benefit analysis of foregoing their rights within the system in order to be invited back, foregoing payments that they are owed, whether that's unfair kickbacks that are taken out of their payment or the travel reimbursements or other costs that they should not be charged. These workers are well aware that they oftentimes are entitled to this, but they choose, because they are threatened, and we have seen this, where crew leaders or employers threaten not just to fire and not hire a worker back, but threaten that they will not be allowed back in the United States for travel. They will see sure of that. They will communicate to the recruiters in their home country or through the pipelines to get to there to cause real concern that they won't be invited back. So I just want to clarify that oftentimes workers do know their rights, and that's not sufficient for them to be able to exercise that, or for them to be able to share that with the relevant state monitor advocate or the Department of Labor. And then third, this has been touched on quite a bit, but access to resources is obviously key, especially if you're talking about expanding to Central America. I know this has been mentioned, but we're talking about not just Spanish here, we're talking about tons of indigenous languages, and what effort is being made at the point of recruitment or upon arrival here to ensure that that workers are being provided with ample resources and information in their language that they can understand. I have seen workers struggle to find access to healthcare, to basic services, to transportation necessary that they would need to exercise these things. And so I wanted to mention that there are infrastructures and service providers, whether they be outreach workers through state agencies or nonprofits, whether they be healthcare workers. There are communities on site that have this information. And so being able to connect workers to these communities that do exist here in the United States, as well as providing that information to the workers while they are still in their point of origin, could be essential for helping them fully exercise their rights. And I don't even think you have to remind me of the 10 seconds. I should close right there. But again, thank you for this opportunity. And again, I really do mean this. It's been wonderful to hear all these other comments as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dorian. Okay, up next we have Hector Rodriguez, and then following Hector is Andrea Schmidt. Hector, do we have you with us? All right, you may begin.
I'm Father Hector Raul Rodriguez, and I'm happy to be here. I have prepared remarks, which I'll be happy to submit, but I am so happy and thrilled by all of the comments so far from our farm worker friends and colleagues and advocacy for farm workers that I will gladly cede my time to hear more of them instead of me. I just want to share that a couple of months ago, right before the watermelon harvest in the eastern shore of Maryland, I was in Westover at the largest prisoner of war turned migrant camp in the country. And I because the harvest had not begun, I was able to visit with quite a few workers. And as I spent more and more time there, while they kept waiting for the work to begin and kept losing money as they waited, I witnessed at least 4 young men who, in desperation and despite the risks involved, decided to travel all the way to Houston. I asked why Houston. I said, well, there's work there. So they basically abandoned the program that brought them there because they couldn't afford to keep spending money on so many things that was necessary to get them there. And then we're continuing to spend money just to survive. So wasn't able to follow up with them. And I don't know how they fared after that. Basically, I think we would be in agreement that the basic program as it exists needs to be totally done away with and created anew. I know that the purview of this hearing is how to improve it or give feedback, but and at the risk of the conflation that we were warned against just a moment ago, it seems to me that a permanent solution is to finally fix the broken immigration system and allow the tens of thousands of workers our economy desperately needs and is crying out for to enter legally and humanely to continue to serve our nation and its industries as they have done throughout our history. Thank you again to all who have spoken, and I hope some of those names I heard that were not able to be with us will somehow catch up and we can hear from them as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, up next is Andrea Schmidt. I'm not sure if Andrea has been able to join us yet. We're going to circle back to some of the speakers that we announced earlier and see if they've been able to join us. So, Yelisa Ambrose. Okay. Melissa Castilla. Robert Crudup. Luz Galagos. Sarah Hulick. Aquile Marciano. Mark Stewart. Maria Elena Valdivia. Leticia Zavala. Lucas Zucker. Okay, we'll try Sarah Martinez. I do believe maybe you've joined us.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, you may begin.
And this is start my video. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarai Martinez. I'm the Executive Director with Centro Binacional para el Desarrollo Indígena Oaxaqueño. We work with indigenous farm workers in the Central Valley and north part of the Central Coast in California. So we work really closely with indigenous farm workers. I feel like, you know, I joined a little late, but I also have heard some testimonies, and I think a lot of what I have to say has been said before. But just wanted to highlight a couple points that we believe that the H2A program has an impact in our local economies, and really wanted to provide that testimony. One For starters, I think that we, as federal government, we shouldn't be investing federal taxes and subsidies to provide for growers to bring workers from other parts when we have a local workforce. And we also have seen that there's like really no enforcement for growers to start recruiting local workers first before starting to recruit H-2A workers. And it really undermines high living wages for the current workforce, as it also limits workers to organize, because they're being threatened by saying we're going to bring H-2A workers if you don't work harder or if you don't accept this wages that we're providing. Those are some consequences we've seen in the local workforce and the impacts that it's having in the workforce, not to say and to limit also the different abuses that had existed in the H-2A workforce. I think the dangerous part is also to put us against each other, which is the dangerous part, because all workers deserve equal treatment. There's a human treatment, but we have seen that that's not true with H-2A workers. And I think that as government that should protect all humans, it should not be complicit of those type of abuses. So for that reason, again, like it's really not, there needs to be other methods in supporting. Again, we have a current workforce that was highly impacted with COVID-19 that continues to be left behind, and using, workers in the government being complicit of it to continue to undermine that is not right. And when government has an answer to provide an immigration reform for all workers to be able to, the current workforce, and to find a new path for workers to come in and work, but with the right to be able to choose who they work with, to find better protections and being able to do so, not to be treated as, really modern slaves, to be with other and to be tied to one employer. So again, like I do feel that this program needs to be not only reformed, reconsidered, but really eliminated, and to think of other ways to, one, provide an immigration reform to all workers that are currently working in the fields, and to find new ways to reduce enforcement in the border, and to provide workers with options to pick who they want to work with once they come to the United States. And I think those will be my comments for today.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us. We are going to go back down through our list and see if any other registered speakers have joined us. Up next is Donald Ransom. Okay, Keely Sorensen. And finally, Andrea Schmidt. I do believe we might have Andrea on.
Hi there, I am
Hi,
on.
Andrea. Yes, you may begin.
Great, I apologize for the delay. Thank you for coming back around. My name is Andrea Schmidt, and I'm an attorney at Columbia Legal Services, which is a Washington statewide legal aid organization. I have been working with H-2A workers and with local workers who are affected by the H-2A program for about 15 years, and my organization for longer than that, has been working with those same workers. We in Washington State have a robust local workforce, and a lot of people who want to do the jobs that are sometimes being offered instead to H-2A workers in Washington. And I think I'll start by just saying that when I looked at the questions that were provided for this forum, it struck me that they all make the assumption that it is possible to consistently overcome the barriers for workers to fair and safe workplaces that are presented under the H-2A program, and I am not sure it is possible. At the risk of repeating things that I'm sure other people have already said, there are structural problems that make H-2A workers vulnerable to abuse that are just absolutely baked into this system. And not just abuse, trafficking and worse, right? That are baked into this system. And that whatever you do in this grant program is going to have to work to overcome, right? So again, and you've heard it before, you're, as an H-2A worker, tied to a single employer, you don't have the ability to change jobs if conditions aren't good. You're isolated, you're without your family, you're dependent on your employer for food, transportation, medical care, all of the basic things that you need. The threat of retaliation, in fact, I shouldn't even say the threat of retaliation, the expectation of retaliation is the central reality for H-2A workers. Even those H-2A workers who only want to ask questions about workplace treatment, about when they're getting a certain payment, about that. Even H-2A workers who want to raise just very, very basic concerns, think twice about that. H-2A workers tell me over and over again, no digo nada, me van a quemar. What is that? I don't say anything. They are going to burn me. That, and doesn't literally mean burn. It means they're going to put me on a do not hire list, on what some people might call a blacklist, if I say anything at all, right? This is the central reality. And that's going to be exacerbated by people coming from places that are, you know, fundamentally dangerous, where gang violence is an everyday reality, and where folks really need asylum rather than an H-2A visa, and where being sent home is a threat that is extraordinarily dangerous and very real for those folks. It'll make the reality of the threat of retaliation worse for these folks from the Northern Triangle. Not to mention that the program is, the H-2A program already is a vehicle for rampant gender and age discrimination. And that makes the program a threat to local women and local older people who work in the workforce here in Washington. So what can USDA do? Boy, you have your work cut out for you. If you truly want to protect people in the system, you need very serious, very innovative measures to overcome these problems that are baked into the H-2A system. Those problems will again be worse for Northern Triangle folks than they are even for others, especially considering that there are Indigenous people who will be in the mix, people who do not speak Spanish as a native language. So you need to do something real about eliminating recruitment fees. The current regulatory ban is not enough to actually eliminate the payment of these huge recruitment fees because people lie about them to get across the border. You have to hold employers accountable for reimbursing travel in the very first week. You have to have culturally and linguistically appropriate ombuds people from the same countries as the workers in each workplace. And those people need to have the power to bring anonymous concerns to light, and they need to have a direct connection to the enforcement folks at USDOL. And they need to have the power to transfer workers to other workplaces if things are not working out. And lastly, I think there should be a requirement to hire women and people over the age of 35 in the program if you truly want to do something about it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea. So we have now called upon all participants who have indicated they wish to speak today during this listening session. As we wrap up, we have a few final reminders. Again, we reminded you at the top of the call that all comments should be submitted in writing to the Federal Register. You can see the web address on your screen there, and it's also in the chat box for this listening session. The deadline to make written comments is October 24th, 2022. A recording of this webinar will be sent to all registered participants and posted online at our website, www.fsa.usda.gov/farmworkers. And with that, that concludes today's listening session. We do thank you very much for your participation, for all of the speakers present, and for those who joined us to listen in. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Hi, Norma. I'm sorry that we missed seeing your hand raised. If you have something to say, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I had registered yesterday and had indicated I wanted to speak and submitted a description of the topic I wanted to address, but I don't know if that got mixed in the shuffle, and if I could still provide my comments.
Absolutely. Let me pull up my timer here and we will begin. Go ahead, Norma.
Thank you so much, and sorry that was so random at the end. But good afternoon. My name is Norma Ventura. I am a staff attorney with the Southern Poverty Law Center. I am here, I think, still with my colleagues Elliot Leppe and Jim Knapp. Thank you for the opportunity to share a few comments with you today. Also, I'm not sure if he's still on, but wanted to give a shout out to my fellow Mixteco speaker who I think spoke earlier. My comments are the following, which I think highlight a lot of what already has been said, but I thought it would be important for you all to hear from our experience as well, given that we primarily serve workers in the South, and that the issues that we see here are not only similar, but in many instances more dire. So the H-2A program in its current form really exists to take advantage of workers. We need a complete overhaul of the program to ensure individuals can come here to work and contribute to our economy on fair terms. The visa program needs to ensure workers are here on their own terms and not under exploitative working conditions. This includes, one, portability, that is the ability to change jobs, whistleblower protections, regulation of labor recruiters, and a path to citizenship. The visa program is ripe with opportunities for employers to put people into debt at the outset through expenses that should be paid by employers. And then the program provides the employers with additional power over the workers by stipulating that the workers can only work for the businesses that applied for their visa. So as a worker, you end up stuck in a bad situation with no way out. You can't just go down the street like the rest of us and take a job with a better employer who will pay you a fair wage and not rip you off. Employers should be required to pay visa and transportation expenses, for example, upfront and not via a later reimbursement. We can't keep putting workers into debt. Further, at this time, a worker's entire ability to stay in the country is tied to having to work for the employer who applied for the visa. This is anti-competitive, and it's a visa program that frequently results in the exploitation of workers and allows that to persist in this country. The pandemic has made it even more difficult for legal service providers to reach workers within the US and countries of origin. For workers living in the US, most workers live in employer-provided housing in isolated areas. Funding for NGOs to provide these services is greatly needed, but the government also needs to do its part in providing KYR information to workers and prospective workers at every stage of the visa process, from recruitment to the time workers return to their country of origin. Workers need greater and quicker and effective access to enforcement agencies that can readily address complaints regarding working conditions and also living conditions. In one case out of Georgia that we handled, 15 H-2A workers were required to live in a trailer where the only toilet and shower available were not functioning. The shower spewed sewer water. Workers were forced to go outside to use the restroom and showered with a garden hose. For an administrative complaint that was filed in 2018, on behalf of these workers, the DOL, the Department of Labor, has yet to resolve its investigation. It's been 4 years and the workers have received no updates on any efforts to remedy the abuses they endured. 2 years ago, we filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of H-2A workers who faced rampant wage theft by a major farm labor contractor. The workers planted sugarcane on farms throughout Louisiana after leaving their homes and their families and spending considerable money to work for the contractor. The case was certified as a class action of more than 2,000 migrant workers who planted sugarcane in Louisiana farms and faced similar exploitative working conditions. In a very similar case, and I'll wrap up, we had a case of workers who had traveled from Nayarit, Mexico, who believed they were going to work in the blueberry harvest, but ended up working for poverty wages, doing something completely different. The women in that case were subjected to sexual harassment and sexual assault. The workers had very little to no information before they came to the United States about their rights and little information about where they could go to seek help. This really needs to change if we are looking to offer a humane and dignified visa program for migrant workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Norma, and our apologies once again for missing you on the first go around. Again, for those who are still listening, we do encourage that you submit your written comments via the e-rulemaking portal. You can find all of that information on our website at fsa.usda.gov/farmworkers. And with that, we will be concluding this listening session. Thank you once again for all of those who provided comments and for those joining to listen in today. Thank you.